green seawater, they actually dissolve and disappear. And therefore, they are treated naturally. I mean, who wants to multiply the superbugs and then have to spend more money treating them? It doesn't make sense to me. I also would like to mention the opportunity cost issue. There are many things we could spend the money on. And lastly, I must say the precautionary principle is a very weak principle in my mind. When there are huge costs to doing something, I would never use the precautionary principle as a way of doing things. And the last speaker, I mean, I can't argue with the numbers that he throws up. It's double Dutch to me, and all I hope is that the CR gets some very good consultants to make sense of all the financial issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice rebuttal. And now we'll hear another nice rebuttal. Now we're my number 2. Tom is my number 2. 2 minutes, Tom.
Thank you. I would first like to address Dr. Sean Peck's thing about the superbugs disappear in seawater. He actually raised the same question at my Air and Waste Management Association, and I thought I addressed it sufficiently, but perhaps not, I don't know. What I can say about this is that, yes, the nature of secondary and tertiary treatment is to grow bacteria, and we have to remove them from the effluent by filtration, and we can do that very well. In the current system, there are some superbugs, and they will be sent into the ocean. What happens is in the salt water and in the cold environment, the bacteria, the regular bacteria from our sewage don't grow very efficiently, but they don't die. They just sit there dormantly. They can definitely exchange plasmids with endogenous bacteria, with the sea-dwelling bacteria. So that issue doesn't disappear, it stays there. And the other thing that I would like to mention is the issue of the contaminants, 60,000 chemicals. If we put them in the ocean, there's the dilution factor, and that will probably work fairly well with water soluble. But the fat soluble chemicals will not disappear. They can accumulate in fish, in mammals, in whales, beluga whales, other whales. Those chemicals don't disappear, and the marine system has no ability to get rid of 60,000 different synthetic chemicals.
Thank you, Dr. Tom. So we move on now to our third speaker, Brian. 2 minutes. Oh, you have one first. 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think I heard mention of microplastics. That has become an issue around the world. The operators of secondary sewage treatment systems recognize that tertiary is not the answer. It's to solve that problem. It's too expensive. The solution is source controls. And so a lot of jurisdictions are starting to put together legislation to prevent products being sold in their jurisdictions that have these microplastics. Also, there are corporations that are voluntarily changing their products or getting ready to change their products to get rid of microplastics. So that issue is best solved by source control. The comment that primary is equal to no treatment surprised me. It's recognized as a level of treatment. And in our case, I should also add that there's more than just whether primary. What's left out of this discussion is the source control. We have an excellent source control system in Victoria, so we don't have to be taking a lot of metals and minerals out of at the end of the pipe. We prevent them going in the first place, which is much cheaper and much more effective. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people are concerned about toxins. We hear the word toxins tossed around a lot. And studies, CRD, we paid for the studies, show that the level of metals, toxins in the pipe before extreme dilution in the ocean, the concentrations are on the order of 10 to 100 times less than drinking water standards. And the marine scientists are constantly saying that the levels that are out in the ocean there are close to the natural background levels, so they're not an issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. And for our last 2 minutes, we'll have you, Chris.
Thank you. I understand that Sean is unimpressed with whether I was explicit enough about whether it was needed or not. It's difficult to spell it out more clearly than to say need tertiary. I think that's pretty clear. Both Brian and Sean have said quite clearly that as far as they're concerned, the solution is too expensive. Well, I'm an economist, so I've run the numbers, and the quotes include spend more money, huge costs, and also the financials are double Dutch, but they're not double Dutch for me. I've gone through them, and I have prepared some slides if anybody wants to go sit behind, because there's a reliance on CRD's very fine consultants, as Brian, as Sean mentioned. Unfortunately, the very fine consultants have made some errors and documented it. The solutions are not too expensive. They're considerably cheaper. They could actually net be profitable to the taxpayer. Quite satisfied with that. And my financials have been reviewed by the Dean Emeritus, South School of Business at UBC, as well as accountants and others. So I'm quite satisfied that the financials are correct. They also comply with international best standards. So I appreciate their enthusiasm for saying that things are more expensive, but I think I'm qualified in that regard.
Well, I kind of want to do another round because that was really exciting. However, the format of the Victoria Salon is to give you an audience too, so that we all have the opportunity to engage in debate. And what we had established as our format is to allow a few speakers from the floor come and speak before we have responses from the panel. So if anyone would like to come down, we're just setting up the microphone so that it's a little bit more accessible for you to come from the floor. We ask you to use the microphone because this is being recorded and will be posted on our website afterwards. So please, yes, we have our first speaker. You also will have a time limit of 2 minutes. So there. Thank you. Can you just state your name and what side you're kind of speaking for?
Well, I'm John Newcomb, and I'm more on the pro side than the con side, but not 100%. I want to thank Chris Corr actually for what he did in 2013, which was to warn people in Victoria West and Esquimalt about how dangerous the anaerobic biodigesters were that would be going into the Viewfield sludge plant. We haven't talked about sludge tonight. I think the precautionary principle suggests to me that it's not a problem of no sewage treatment or little sewage treatment or marine sewage treatment versus tertiary. The fact that the CRD includes no criteria for safety, hazard, danger, threat, or risk. The triple bottom line didn't include it, and that's where we got the Viewfield mistake. It would have been very dangerous. It's still not included. And I did hear Chris Corr give a very excellent vendor presentation on tertiary, but he wasn't asked to say anything about safety, hazard, danger, or threat. And I guess what I see right now with our marine-based sewage treatment, there's very low danger to our human community. Bring this on shore, and there's liable to be a much greater danger. And it's not just anaerobic digesters, it's gasifiers. And I'm concerned about all of that, and I think it's the sort of thing that we need to have some response to, so I don't have it addressed any particular person's question, it's just a concern.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Do we have another speaker who'd like to come down and speak immediately? Then do you want, anybody want to respond to those comments?
Thank you for that. Yes, I thought the exploding note about Viewfield was probably appropriate. I have to correct you. In fact, the CRD's criteria include safety, hazard, risk, and everything else, and they've ignored it, unfortunately. They have no ranking tables on that. It was not included in No 36 DP 1 or 2, and so those components were excluded, and they've been excluded subsequently, unfortunately. With regard to gasifiers, at any one time there's only a few kilograms of gas in a gasifier because they volatilize the materials very quickly as opposed to incinerators or anaerobic digesters. Anaerobic digesters will have material in them for 30 or 40 days creating gas, and so yes, there can be bombs if they're not well managed. But the reason for gasification is because it volatilizes extremely rapidly. And the reason that you know that these are safe is actually there's one dockside green right on residential, on-site residential, and they exist in other communities as well. So I'm pleased to say that yes, I have the same concerns that you do on safety. And it's one of the reasons that I think gasification is an appropriate solution. Meets all the other criteria as well.
Thank you. Do we have any more speakers from the floor at this time? Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Will you introduce yourself, please?
Brian Gilbert, and I'm speaking just as myself to speak right now. My take on the question is multifaceted. I've been on this topic for many, many years. The word need is an interesting word. It's a subjective word. Is it a scientific need? Is it an emotional need, a moral need, as was raised? Is it a political need? We can take it in a lot of different directions. On a scientific level, I'm quite on side with the marine scientists. I quite agree with their points of view and the science behind them. As an opportunity cost, the amount of money that is going to be spent could be put in a lot of other marine beneficial programs. I've heard Dr. J. Collins speak, very effective and very convincing. But the question now is, where are we as a need in the society, in our region? We've had 3 elections. There's been a federal by-election. Canada won, definitely in terms of secondary sewage, to our detriment. Then there was the provincial election. Again, Green candidates and NDP candidates, both very definitely saying this is the thing. So in other words, the public is saying this is what they want. The municipal election again, recently, the clear message is the politics are in favor of treating. So therefore, we're in a situation where we need to treat to just satisfy that. Then the question is, what's the best solution for that? And that's where I really love the message that's coming out of what Chris is saying, that it's a money maker. If we do it right. And we've been fighting the CRD secondary and the ineptitude and the misconceptions, the misleading media. I completely agree with you on the media to take in the last 3 years, 4 years. We're changing, we have to change that. So I'm hoping that this debate and many other topics that's going to happen over the next month will do that. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I really like both sides of the argument here, but where we're at in this region at this time is we really have to do something. We have to do it right, and RITE, with respect, with innovation, taxpayer-friendly, and environmentally beneficial.
Thank you. We have more speakers from the floor? Excellent. And if you have any responses, just keep them in mind so that you can have the opportunity. No, go ahead. Please identify yourself.
This is last Monday. I would just like to add that we had these various reasons, like economical, political, and then we go to the political. We also have to look at our neighbors to the south, who have very strongly objected to Victoria not having a sewage treatment plant. And they have even threatened boycotting tourist trade and various other things, because all the other municipalities down south on the waterfront have some kind of a treatment plant. As for danger, everything which we do has some kind of a danger built into it. But if you look at Vancouver, where they have well-functioning sewage treatment plants, we can follow Chris's suggestion, look at the tertiary treatments, and I'm sure we can come up with a design which will be safe and economical.
Thank you. Do we have another speaker from the floor? We do. Take your notes, gentlemen. And you can please introduce yourself.
Later, Victoria. First of all, I want to thank the Esquimalt Council for overturning the proposed site the longer we get to study this, the more likely we're going to have a sane infrastructure. As I understand, this debate tonight is sort of more of intellectual debate in terms that we're going to have to do it anyway. I've always been of the opinion that we don't need to do it. One of my former profs at UBC, Dr. Tim Parsons, was one of the people who studied this along with other scientists, and over and over again, we've been told by these people that the current system works well. But I agree with what's been said, and I think it's been a political policy that we have to do this. And so, if we are going to do it, secondary treatment should not be considered, tertiary treatment should. And I'm appreciative of the information that's been brought tonight about how tertiary treatment can be a money saver in many ways over secondary treatment. So if we're going to do it, let's not consider anything but tertiary treatment.
All right, gentlemen at the table, do we have some? Oh, do you have to speak? Please.
My name is Karen James. I live in Esquimalt, and I've done some sewage treatment tours with the CRD down into Washington State. And I have a science background. I'm not an engineer, but I do get frustrated when I feel the public is being misled with exaggerated claims of toxins, contamination, this feeling that we must proceed because we've been mandated to do it. I think that we need to develop a very strong sense of our moral compass. I mean, how many times do we need to hear the ocean scientists tell us we're going to get more bang for our buck? The ocean environment could be healthier if we put our money into different programs. Sure, our laboratory detection limits are improving. We are able to measure more and more minute concentrations, but let's not trick ourselves that these could be serious problems to our health as they're understood right now. Sure, there could be things in the water which we are now capable of resolving our present, but what is the real risk to us, and what is the value of our taxes in going into these projects right now with our economy changing, the whole country requiring infrastructure upgrades? We need to have a regional sense of priority for our tax dollars. This is just because the money is available now doesn't mean that it should be available to Victoria. We've got much better, we've got fantastic ocean environment here, which we don't seem to have the courage to defend. In that case, we could be putting our money into far sexier projects that the rest of the country doesn't have the same opportunity to capitalize. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, I think before we saturate the memory of those of us up here, anybody want to respond to any of that? Yes, 2 minutes, yeah.
Well, just a couple of comments. I like Karen Davis' comment, thank you very much. I'd like to speak to Brian Gilbert's comments. I think you hit the nail on the head when you distinguish between need and want. Those are two different things. Need is something that is decided after people have examined all the evidence and decided that there's some benefit in doing it. Want is a desire to do something. And I think we're hearing a lot of want going on at the moment. And I'm fascinated to know what's going to happen with all these east side and west side consultations and what on earth is going to come out of this, because I think by June they're meant to be coming up with some preliminary plans, and then by the end of the year they're meant to have a modified liquid waste management plan. I'm not optimistic they're going to be able to do this. I'm terrified that the whole thing is going to cost a hell of a lot more. I mean, I'm not sure whether your financial numbers are right, and hopefully someone will check all those. If there really is something that's going to cost less, okay, well, that's better. But in the end, you've got to convince the CRD elected officials that they've got the mandate. They've already borrowed $100 million for which we're paying the interest on it. We're going to pay $13.7 million in interest over the time for this $100 million that they borrowed. You notice some of the municipalities now starting to complain about that amount that they're having to pay each year. I could ramble on a bit on quite a number of issues.
We don't have time, so you're very on.
30 seconds.
All right.
Well, I will comment on the safety bit, if you like. Dr. Rebecca Warburton, she's an economist, and she wrote a very interesting paper, and I printed off some of the things that pointing out that there are hazards in building sewage treatment plants, and I think we need to hear more about that. Negative human health effects during construction due to dust and noise, increased traffic in residential neighbourhoods during construction, posing risks to cyclists and pedestrians, risk of disturbing archaeological remains during construction, disruption to tourism, Victoria's main industry during construction, earthquake and tsunami, permanent negative human effects and land-based treatment, etc. Do you want me to carry on? She produced a wonderful list. There are many hazards.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you. I've heard Dr. Warburton's items. First of all, I just say I've been in the real estate business for 30 years. Those are all dealt with by law, and they are dealt with by developers. So, with greatest respect to Dr. Warburton, I don't think those are issues. The need to have a regional sense of our tax laws, I completely agree, and it's a problem that we face. And the reason to go with tertiary disinfected is to reduce the cost from primary. And that's the point that I'm making. If the cost today is not free, we don't know what the cost is. But if the cost of tertiary is negligible or possibly profitable if you get it right and optimized, then you're actually saving relative to today's position. So the idea that you continue to discharge is then moot, basically. You do it, therefore, because you want to invest in affordable housing. You do it because you want to invest in seniors' care. You do it for a number of other reasons. So that's the reason that you do it. In terms of CRD having a mandate, I have sat down 3 times with the former Deputy Minister and respectfully read them out for the fact that CRD do not in fact have the mandate. Legally, and he agrees, legally they do not have a mandate except at the whim of the municipalities, and if the Minister directs that they should be the recipient of them. At the moment, the municipalities would probably like to exit stage left, if you ask them well enough. However, the Minister is basically saying channel it through CRD, probably because it makes life simpler, but probably for no other reason. They do not have legally the mandate.
Well, I must say I would like to ask this comment about it's going to be profitable to have tertiary treatment. How can you spend $1 billion of taxpayers' money, or even 250 million taxpayers' money, and make a profit?
You can.
Well, tell us how.
Within the
Let's do it.
it's
2 minutes.
Yeah, there's 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, we'll describe a multi-billion-dollar project. Basically, the sewage treatment plants have to be optimized by making the system optimized itself and using the latest technologies, making them very, very small. That reduces the cost, and that's why we went to Scandinavia to find the very best of the most efficient technologies. That's the first step. The second step, though, is we use gasification. That is a fraction of the cost of what was proposed in anaerobic digestion, which I would never recommend. In terms of what you then do is, because you've actually gained the revenues from the sewage treatment plants which are distributed, so if you imagine one outside the window here, you'd probably not know it, you can distribute the heat, capture it from this building and put it back into this building before it leaves, and that saves you money. And then when you go to the gasifier, you've saved money because you're generating the following: electricity, heating, cooling, biocarbons, biochar, and of course you've got GHG and other savings as well. Those are all revenues. One of those alone is about $2,000 a ton. So the idea that you're going to spend the money at $250 million is completely offset by the revenues that you gain from recovering the resources, which is the point we made in 2009.
Thank you. comment on anything that you've heard from our audience or from the rebuttals? All right.
Okay, I would just like to make one quick comment. One about the microplastics and source control. That may take 20 years before all the microbeads and microplastics will disappear from our sewage treatment. So we will have treatment by 2020. We cannot rely on source control of microbeads, microplastics. The damage to the ocean is ongoing. And the other point I would like to make is, out of 60,000 chemicals that we flush down the drain, a certain number of them are fat soluble and they keep accumulating in the mammals. So dilution is perhaps a solution for some water soluble compounds, but not for thousands of other compounds. That some of the fish, some of the whales are toxic danger. Basically, they keep accumulating these toxic compounds, and we have to get rid of them. And one way to do it is with tertiary filtering out all the chemicals and treating the effluent. So we destroy these chemicals so they don't end up in the ocean.
Yeah, my understanding of the microplastics, the corporations that are voluntarily going to take them out of their products are looking at completing that within a couple of years to remove the microplastics from the products. And the jurisdictions that are looking at legislation, they're talking about a 2-year window. So the action can begin as early as 2 years to start reducing microplastics. There was a statement made about the Washington State and their objections. Those are political objections. The problem with the politicians have in Washington State is their own marine scientists don't back them up. Some of these studies about Victoria's system have been done by marine scientists in Washington State, and they put their signatures to these documents, and these documents say that Victoria's impact on the Strait of is negligible. And that's coming out of Washington State. If Victoria was in the United States, it's likely that our system would receive a waiver. The business about we must do it, that was the same in the United States when they introduced their Clean Water Act. Everybody had to do it. But there were so many lawsuits launched by communities on the coasts saying that their systems that were using the ocean to treat their effluent were equivalent to the new regulations, and it was silly to be spending billions of dollars to replace something that already worked. And there was such an uproar that the U.S. Congress actually commissioned the National Research Council to review the regulations. And what came out of that was the waiver system. They recognized that the ocean does treat, and they came up with a waiver system, and about 4 dozen communities were given waivers. They carried on with their systems of marine treatment. And that's still in existence in the United States. Time? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else from the floor who would like to say something to this debate or dialogue? Actually, when we were arranging people to come and speak, and we were asking these gentlemen to come and speak, one of the comments that came back to us was that it would be much nicer to have this as a dialogue than as a debate. Although I do see 2 very clear sides, so a debate really seems to make sense, but a dialogue is much more polite. You sure nobody else wants to engage? Yes. Oh, we have 2 people now jumping forward. Teal, you stay as timekeeper for now.
I'm Julian Greenwood from Victoria. I just want to say one thing. It seems to me that the motion has been, that one can feel very strongly that the motion has been won by, let's say, these 2 gentlemen here, and at the same time be delighted to hear Mr. Brian Birchall, no, Mr. Chris, I've forgotten that name, I'm sorry, say that in fact tertiary treatment would provide financial advantages, but nevertheless it doesn't actually deal with the motion, which is there a need? What we really have to decide is whether or not the sea is presently treating the sewage adequately, even if we could do it and get benefit from you.
Thank you. All right, Teal, I'm going to time you.
It's probably a good thing. I'm probably the person who needs to time the most. I'm Dr. Teal Phelps-Bongraw, and I'm a debate coach. The first thing I point out among many things is that I think both sides argue about the precautionary principle. And when you're doing that, you have to look at the different values in which you're basing it. So I think it was quite interesting to see the risks of doing tertiary treatment or the risks of not doing tertiary treatment. It's quite interesting back and forth. My question is not on that, though. I'm also a political scientist, and I study fisheries issues. And my question, I guess, first of all, would be to Dr. Sean Peck regarding the baselines for the ecosystems. So we're looking at the effects of the effluent, and you were at one point saying that it actually increases the biological not diversity, but biological growth in these areas. What baseline are you using? I guess from previous time, I'm not familiar with this. And then the second question would be, is it an impact on certain kinds of species or on the ecosystem in general? Because I think one thing that's interesting, both sides talk about how we use ecosystem services. But I guess the question would be, if we don't go to a tertiary system, we have this extra money, what projects do we use to make the ecosystem more robust, to allow it to continue to do the service, to say accommodate things like population growth? There's a lot of questions in one there, but I wonder if you could speak into that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I just have to first say that I'm not a marine scientist or a fisheries expert, but from what my understanding is, as the slides show, that you get an enrichment of the ocean floor around the outfall. And so all the species are changed, no question about it. How it affects its fisheries otherwise, you have to say to yourself, well, what's the exposure of the fishery? I mean, there's a lot of talk about whales, how they bioaccumulate things, but then you have to say to yourself, well, what's the exposure to the plume with this very small amount compared with the ocean? Then you look at things like shellfish, where there's a shellfish closure all around the coast. Well, that will always be there because of the stormwater drains. And actually, our deep sea outfalls, all the studies show that they do not contaminate. When I was a medical officer, we actually removed signs warning the public because they put the East Coast Interceptor in at that time. And it was studies showing that all the contamination had been around the drains that came down the stormwater drains. So I hope I've answered your questions.
Thank you. Are there any more comments from the floor? Well, it is 8:30. Oh, yes, please.
I might as well like to.
Please. Remember to say your name.
My name is Mike Corey, and I'll state for the record that I lean to the Peck virtual camp. I think nature has a very powerful influence and has been biodegrading organic waste and such for many years. As far as the microbugs, I also agree with Sean Peck, using secondary treatment, tertiary treatment, we are enhancing the environment to grow those superbugs and enhance and transfer the plasmas. I think I'd love to read some studies about plasma transfer in the ocean marine environment. But what I can't figure out is I like the idea of tertiary treatment plant. It's definitely going to solve all the issues. But I'm not so sure that the taxpayers generally should be picking up the tab. I'm glad you brought up Dockside Green. Excellent. Good pure water. And the people that live in Dockside Green are very proud of the treatment plant. And they're probably also very conscious of treatment in general. So I don't know why we don't get developers and builders, so when they do put in a subdivision or they do build a building, they install their own treatment plants before it gets to the sewage system. Therefore, they absorb the cost, not the taxpayers. I think it could be done much more efficiently than a large government project. And another comment is, I find it really hard to believe that tertiary treatment would pay for itself, given the residuals, given the cost of ultrafiltration membranes. Certainly there's a lot of residuals from gasification plants. Where did those residuals go? And if I'm mistaken, please educate me. Just give me a couple more ways that tertiary is actually cheaper than primary. Thank you.
Quite a lot of that. That's at least 4 minutes. So the challenge with this is that on gasification, it really needs to have more public exposure, so it's understood. But it's not as though it's not rocket science. It's actually been around for 150 years. So the latest versions are very good, and that's one of the reasons why. I haven't brought the tools with me today to explain that, but I believe that there is a move afoot to allow that to come out into the public so that they can be made aware. With regard to the costs and revenues of doing this, I think the challenge with it is that there's a complete misperception as to what the real costs and revenues are, and it's been driven by media and information over very many years. It's the reason that I came equipped with some explanations to do that, and I think after we're finished, those who want to stay on, I'm quite happy to quickly go through the slides and explain just a few of those components. And can then answer perhaps more broadly some of the questions. So I think probably the best way to handle it is outside of the immediate debate forum. Try and handle it properly that way.
Did you also want to share?
Yeah, well, I'd just like to comment on the gasification issue, which, I mean, I think Chris Cork is correct. It's been around for a long time. But there was a really excellent presentation by a Dr. Sim from Stantec, who manages their public practice and has 1,400 people who look at 200 treatment plants a year. And what he pointed out was it's still not been proven to use for biosolids, for sludge. It's only been used for solid waste and wood waste and things like that. So I think it's a mistake to say that from what, and I'm only going by what he said, and I look upon him as a really excellent expert, a PhD
That's the problem.
environmental. Well, I mean, people don't want to believe experts, but this guy has a PhD in environmental engineering, and I found his testimony extremely credible.
No, I'm sorry, but Dr. Sim actually stated in his presentation at CRD that he was not expert in this field, and he relied on an expert within his organization who called us and said that he was an expert in sewage treatment, but essentially he was calling up because he was kind of interested in gasification, and please could we tell him something about it. Respectfully, that is not expertise, and you're not going to come out with the right solution if you don't have the right expertise in the first place. Respectfully to Stantec, if Dr. Sim would like to come here and talk it through, we'll bring our experts, which include University of California, Davis, University of California, San Diego, Technical University of Vienna, 10 plants delivered in international guises worldwide. Frankly, Dr. Sim is an expert in his field, but he's not an expert in this field. And he said it, if you play the video, you'll hear him say it.
Thank you. Did you want to finish, Sean? You were in the middle of saying something, I think. No, you're good? Okay. Brian, go ahead. 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
My concern around the gasification is we're locking up the carbon by sequestering it into the ocean, and I think I'm more comfortable with that than gasification, which means putting the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. I have a problem around that, of gasifying things and creating greenhouse gases, and I would suspect increase the issue of climate change. If the tertiary treatment really is a moneymaker with resource recovery and everything, I'm wondering why jurisdictions around the world aren't jumping on the bandwagon and be making money. I'm not hearing this happening. So I have a concern around that. But the previous speaker concerned about toxicity in fish and somewhere toxicity in whales was concerned. I just want to address that as well. And so if we put in whatever system that makes people feel happy that we're less toxic, do you think that the toxicity of the whales is going to go down? They range from California to Alaska, past pulp and paper mills. That's where they're picking up a huge amount of toxins.
Our little discharge, which ours is small compared to what else is going out along the entire coast, is small. Us spending $1 billion or $250,000, $1 million, as you might, is not going to make the whales less toxic. Our impact here is minimal on the whales. Thank you.
So just before, I know you want to respond. I just want to make sure that we have an opportunity from the floor as well. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment to join this dialogue? Anybody? Oh, we have someone else in the back. Thank you.
My name is Gordon Robinson. I usually say Victoria, but in this audience I'll say Sandwich because I'm actually from that municipality. I'm interested in this debate and in the way it is formulated. I think I've heard some really excellent arguments on both sides, and it's been quite impressive. What's interesting and challenging to me is I've heard arguments on two sides of a debate which seems in the public forum is going in some third direction, which is what both sides have been arguing against. So politics is the art of the possible, and what I'm wondering is how it is possible that we're making such a bad decision publicly, and how it would be possible to change the minds of the politicians. Now, I have some experience with this because I spent about 25 years advising governments and politicians in particular about what maybe they ought to do. And I know it's not always possible to get them to do what you think is the best, but I'd be interested to hear what ideas you would have to change, to move the debate on the public side, which is not at all the options that we've been hearing here.
Before you go away, and you have about 40 seconds left, what would be your suggestions?
To swing the politicians? Well, I think we heard some of them here. I think there should be some strong pressure to try to look at the opportunity to defer, and we've had some good fortune. Ms. Weinwald has managed to defer the debate somewhat, to pick a really efficient solution and not to do something precipitous in the meantime. And the way to get a deferral, I think, is to argue that we really ought to look at ways to get around the apparent legal requirement, which is in fact not a need, it is a force of, not nature perhaps, but of human nature.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have another speaker who would like to come forward from the floor? No. Yes? Yes. How did I know that you wanted to say something?
I don't feel like we're not form.
Take a chance.
Yeah. So I'm the Sewage. I feel like we're using the same words to mean different things sometimes. So my concern, I agree that nature can handle human waste, right? So like composting, it's natural, it's great. But my concern is all these chemicals that we consume, so drugs that we ingest and that are partially metabolized, etc. All the cleaning products that are on the shelf that people don't even think about putting in the water. This isn't a question for Victoria, this is a question on a global scale. And so I feel like we're discussing pieces that don't necessarily fit together. Even when we talk about cost, we're talking financial cost, when really we should be talking about environmental cost, which doesn't have a price tag. So anyway, it's not a question, it's just, I find myself drawn to the tertiary treatment, but I'm not quite convinced that it's really going to do all the things we're hoping it's going to do. I don't know how you address that.
And I don't think it needs to be addressed. Thank you for sharing your opinion. Anybody else? I seem to have to look. All right, I'm going to I know Chris has been chomping at the bit here, and Tom, so 2 minutes, and then we'll go across and then back to you.
Okay, so firstly, I'd like to correct the statement that gasification increases GHGs compared to alternatives. That's not correct. The reason for that is that if you look at what GHGs are created by gasification, they're already aerobic, they're in the system. So the point that's made is that it's not going to sequester as much, which the ocean would naturally do. The reason it's incorrect is you're offsetting fossil GHG expenses such as natural gas, coal-fired power, which we get at night from Alberta, and we're not going to go away from it anytime soon, and so on. And then in addition, you get either biochar or biocarbon or can from gasifier, and so you're able to sequester those components should you choose to do so. So it's actually better than the ocean, and that's why it's better on GHGs. In terms of why governments aren't doing this around the world, well, the fact is this: they are. Go to the World Bank's website. You'll see a whole section on advocating this, setting out how to do it, and there's international conferences held on this. There are 2 people who've written books on it, and they are doing it.
Thank you. Do one of the gentlemen have a comment? Sean or Brian? I'll pass off to Tom then. Oh, okay. I just want to go back and forth. That's all. Nope. Okay, Tom, you're on.
Thank you. I would like to address or make a comment to that previous speaker, that lady at the back. She had some doubts about tertiary being able to handle all these chemicals. Those chemicals that are not water soluble will be filtered out together with the sludge, microplastics, bugs, and so on by the membranes. What is soluble, the soluble chemicals in the effluent, will not be treated just by the filtration, but you can destroy them very effectively by the advanced oxidation, the UV and hydrogen peroxide. I didn't get to it in my presentation, but on the average, about 99% of various testing compounds were destroyed by UV and hydrogen peroxide, or sometimes some treatment plants use ozone and hydrogen peroxide. The hydroxyl radicals will be able to destroy all of these chemicals. So it's very effective in getting rid of them. Something that the ocean cannot do.
All right, thank you very much. You know, we're a little over time, but I think that the conversation has been quite exciting. I know I've been taking lots of notes, so I hope that this conversation has been very informative for all of you, and please know that the conversation is not over. This is just the beginning. Please feel free to continue the dialogue as you can, and we are keeping a little list at the table here. If your opinion has changed in some way through what you've heard today, please let us know. We're just going to keep a tally. I'm not asking you what you believe or what you have, if you've changed, how you've changed your mind, but if something you've learned today or heard today has somehow touched you or changed your mind, please let us know so that we know that we're making a difference. Again, thank you so much for coming out, and I think Dorothy has a few closing remarks. Oh, and as Dorothy's making her way up, Chris has reminded me too, he does have additional slides in his slide deck. If you would like to hear more information about what he is talking about, then he is very happy to show those and talk to those of you who would like to stay behind. Thank you.
My final remarks are simply to say thank you for joining us this evening, and thanks especially to our panelists, Dr. Sean Peck, Brian Burchell, Chris Core, and Dr. Tom Naylor. And thanks to you too, Kathy, for doing a fine job of moderating the debate. I'd also like to say thanks to Teal Bondarov for being our timekeeper tonight, and for Eric Dybart, who has been our videographer. Eric will be turning the video over to us to be posted on the website for the Victoria Salon, so you can share it with your friends. We at the Victoria Salon promise an evening of thinking, discussing, debating, and we hope that we've fulfilled our promise to you tonight. Please watch our website for future debates. This is our second, but we have a long list of other topics that we wish to present to Victoria. So please join us, become involved, debate these issues of importance to us. Thank you very much.